Do you want some water? No. Thanks. Hello and welcome back to CSE's Live Chat. I'm Sukanya Nair, and today we are going to discuss an issue that affects each and every one of us, and that is the mobility crisis in India's urban spaces. Be it Delhi to Dispur, Pune, Kochi, and even Silchar, everybody has a commute stories. And that brings me to this today's live chat. And before that, let me just introduce CSE's mobility team. And for many, many years now, CSE has been working towards making urban transport clean and sustainable. And now taking it one step further, we have Down Towards campaign, the new and powerful campaign called How India Moves, where we are going to discuss where these people from across India, we have gathered 50, I mean, from 50 cities, we have gathered, compiled, analyzed to ask to answer one simple question, and that is how India moves. So let me introduce you to today's guest here. We have Shubham Srivastav. He's with CSE's mobility team. He's a mobility expert. And we have Snigdha, who has
Hello.
incredibly managed and edited this entire series of Down to Earth this campaign. So welcome you both. Thank you so much for joining. Let me start with you, Snigdha. How did this all happen? How did this campaign come up? What was the driving force of how India moves?
Thank you, Sukanya, for having us on your live chat. So let me answer your question by asking you a question. How far is your residence and how long did it take you to get to the office today?
Okay, so I live about 4.5 kilometers from our office, and it takes me about 25 minutes on a normal traffic day. But there have been days when I've been stuck for 45 minutes to 1 hour to get just reach office. So that has also happened.
Okay. Now that's 5 to 9 kilometers per hour, which is less than the average speed of a bicycle.
Yes.
So probably if you were taken a bicycle, you could have reached office sooner. So, but since the road you took today is probably not designed for cycling, so you spend double the time crawling through the traffic in an auto rickshaw probably,
Right.
and getting exposed to hot toxic fumes coming from all the vehicles around you that were also stuck with you. So now this is not a benign problem as it seems. Vehicular exhaust is a toxic cocktail of nitrogen oxides, particulate matter, and various other pollutants. When stuck in traffic, vehicles tend to continue to burn fuel inefficiently and release more of these harmful pollutants. This means if you are caught in traffic, you are exposed to a very high concentration of these toxic fumes, and your exposure goes up with the increase in the traffic volume and the duration which you spend in the congestion. Now, there are enough studies that link one's exposure to such high concentration of vehicular exhaust to different illnesses like chronic respiratory illnesses, cardiovascular diseases, and even premature death. Not to mention that getting caught in congestion also affects one's, takes a toll on your mental health and the productivity level. I would say that you are still lucky, Sukanya, because you have a house so closer to your workplace. Now, I know many people in Delhi who actually commute the 30 to 45 kilometers every day to reach their workplace. Now, on an average, if you do a calculation, these people spend 45 days in a year just getting stuck in the traffic congestion. Now that means they are spending 1.5 months in a year just on roads, doing nothing but inhaling the toxic fumes. And this is not just happening in the big cities like Delhi. This is also happening in all the smaller cities where roads are getting congested. So this is what we have tried to explore through this series, How India Moves. We have tried to assess the extent and the triggers of this mobility crisis, which is actually behind a lot of the crises that our cities face today. So it is a leading cause of local air pollution, our public health crisis, the crisis of mental health, the crisis of declining productivity. In fact, this is the crisis that is primarily making our cities unlivable. So our reporters have traveled through 50 cities, both mega and small, for this series. What they have found is quite worrying. Like, they interacted with people who say that the congestion levels have gone up despite authorities laying new roads, widening the existing roads, and building flyovers after flyovers. The reason, invariably, what they say has been the lack of space for walking and cycling and an inefficient or unaffordable public transport system. Now, let me just give you a few examples. So, Silchar, which you just mentioned, which it is the second largest city in Assam, it has no city buses. Now, residents depend entirely on three wheelers or their own vehicles, which eventually leads to encroachments on roads for parking and congestion. We have spoken to students of Silchar Medical College who say it takes them more than an hour to commute just 6.5 kilometers to reach their medical college. Now, Rishikesh, where the number of tourists far exceed the local population, also lacks a designated bus service and relies on diesel-powered Vikrams, which is a three-wheeler, or their own personal vehicle, like two-wheelers mostly, which then bring the traffic to a near halt. Now, in Bangalore, which is said to be the second slowest city in India after Kolkata, we have met people who are so frustrated with the congestion that they prefer walking to work. Now, even two wheelers get stuck in traffic bottlenecks there. Not all cities that we have covered are bad. There are some very good examples as well, where authorities have managed to streamline mobility, and it shows in the city's pollution load and in the overall environment. Now, more such details you can find in our latest edition, which is out today. This is our latest edition.
Like an official release. I like it.
Yes.
Right. Shubham, let me loop you in right now.
Yeah.
Can you walk us through the big numbers or the pattern that you observed across these 50 cities?
Oh, absolutely. And thank you, first of all, for this platform and for the Down to Earth team for this brilliant campaign which they're running. Picking out, such nuances of mobility which are often people are unaware of and which are often hidden from the public eye. What we actually did was what we tried to do is for all these cities, we focused on three main mobility parameters. The first one is the modal share, which is the share of trips which are happening by each particular type of mode of transport out of the total trips. So that is the modal share. Then we also looked at the trip characteristics of the city. So trip length and trip rate. So trip length is the average, the length of the average trip which a person makes in the city, and then the trip rate, which is the per capita, how many trips a person is per capita is being taken in the city per day. Then we also looked at the congestion levels. So congestion levels we looked at through the congestion index, which is basically the change from non-peak to peak hours in traffic conditions. And we tried to capture two data points. So basically 2 years. One was our baseline and the other was the most recent data available before the baseline. So the first big number what we found was that there is a huge dependence on private transportation, which is the cars and two-wheelers, much less on cars. So for cars, we found that the modal share of cars was between 7 and 12% in most cities across the board. However, two-wheelers most cities have a modal share of 30% or more, and it goes up to 42% in some cities. For example, Kochi and Pune have a very high share of two-wheelers in the cities. And then so that why is that worrying? You see the source apportionment studies which have been done in cities, and I'm giving an example of Delhi here. That so in 2018, the source apportionment study said that two-wheelers and cars, which is a private mode of transportations, they carry a very large amount of emission load out of all the sources in the city. So two-wheelers and cars, for example, in 2018 in Delhi, for two-wheelers and cars was 40% of PM emissions and 81% of NOx emissions out of all sources. And the situation is not just specific to Delhi here, it's actually the story of most cities. So this is one problem. Then the other problem is that the public transportation share is declining. In fact, in mega cities, the average share decline was 6%, mega and metro cities. And then the smaller cities, because they do not have a official indigenous city bus service sort of a system or any metro service, their mode share of public transportation is almost negligible. So, like Sindh also give an example, Silcha, for example, has a 0% share because it does not really have its own city bus service, right? They have to depend on services which are given by the state, where the buses are actually running on intercity routes, and the public basically has to take those routes to reach places. So, which is why their IPT, which is the intermediate paratransit, so think auto rickshaws, e-rickshaws, Gramin Seva, like the ones that run in Delhi, all of these modes actually act as the public transportation for these regions. And which is why the smaller cities, you will see the IPT shares are much higher. Another trend was that most cities have a very high share of non-motorized transportation, which is people walk or cycle, right? Still, and walk, I mean, obviously walking more than cycling because of the lack of infra that we have in the city, in cities. So, however, now see the problem there is that despite, so 30 to 40% in most cities is the mode share of the walking and the cycling modes. And the problem there is, now you see there is a almost negligible infrastructure available for even the footpaths, sidewalks, or people to pedal. The tracks available for that is negligible. So there is the problem. So basically, we're not really planning for what the demand of travel that there is. Another pattern that we saw was the trip lengths and the trip rate. So basically, both of them are increasing, which means that city is it's happening because of the sprawling cities, right? So the trip length, for example, in some cities we saw that it's been increased, it's almost doubling. So Delhi, for example, it has gone from 6 kilometers in 2007 to 11 kilometers in 2018. So that's the kind of increase in the average trip length which you're seeing in the cities. I think the average is somewhere between 10 and 12%, 10 and 13%, something like that. And then the trip rates are also increasing much more, so a lot of more people are traveling as well. That is also has been increased for, I think, about 12 and 13% on an average across all the cities, all the categories. And then we have also investigated the congestion levels. So the congestion levels basically for cities, the mega cities and the metro cities, so for example, Bangalore, Chandigarh, Pune, Mumbai, all of these have a congestion level more than 40%, going up to 47%. That is the change in the speed during congestion, right? 47% decrease in the speed, which is about halving of the speed, right? And then smaller cities have a much lower congestion, but it's still high compared to the kind of traffic conditions that we're actually used to. So, for example, the million plus cities have a 38% reduction in congestion on an average, and then 38%, and then the much smaller cities have 28% reduction in traffic speed during congestions. Now, so basically, what I'm trying to say is, and I'll try to summarize this, that basically the whole story tells us that people are traveling longer, people are traveling more frequently, and these trips are actually happening on personal modes more than that are happening in public transportation modes or other shared kind of modes, which means the pollution levels, the emissions, and the congestion is increasing. And therefore, that is leading to the congestion specifically is leading to people losing confidence in the already failing public transportation systems, and the loss in confidence is actually ruining the public transportation system even more, and this cycle is therefore vicious. So, yeah.
This is a vast undertaking. I mean,
Yeah.
to just analyze this data in itself.
Yeah.
My question to you again, I think, Shubham, I'll ask you this question again. How did you get hold of all this data? I mean, is it available on public platform? And say for tomorrow, based on this study, if somebody wants, some policymaker or researcher wants to take the study forward,
Yeah.
how do they access it? Is it it's available publicly?
So when we were looking for this data, it was actually quite challenging because the first problem, the biggest problem in urban mobility is that we do not have formal systems to collect data for all these different kinds of indicators that we're looking at for mobility. So, for example, we do not know how people are traveling, where people are going, how long is it taking them, how long are they going, and all the different kinds of modes which they're taking. And then among the modes itself, what is the kind of service level benchmarks those particular modes have. So all of this data is not really calculated regularly. It only happens once in a while. It's like a random thing which the city sometimes decide to do. And that is usually followed by a kind of a policy that's coming into the picture, for which they require some sort of funding to show the project costs, estimated costs, stuff like that. So the last it happened for across the country was when the JNNURM scheme came in, and the cities were actually mandated to prepare their own comprehensive mobility plans. So a lot of the data that we are actually using are coming from the comprehensive mobility plans. But the challenge now is that because the scheme was in fact much older, all the CMPs were prepared very, very long ago. We have to rely on data which is 10 to 12 years ago. The between the baselines and the most recent years, some cities like Kolkata, for example, have 20-25 years ago data. Then also the problem is that so basically now what we actually need is, and another thing I would like to point out is that this is not just a problem with the data. This is a problem that mobility is not being taken seriously in urban planning, right? So uh, all these indicators that we're talking about, so even uh, despite mobility being one of the most important factors in emissions, city level plans, even our reputed NCAP program, the National Clean Air Action Program, uh, which mandates people to the cities to actually create the NCAP plans for themselves to actually list the interventions for actually taking action towards emissions. They also do not have mobility indicators listed down very well. So at most you can take up any plan. They're available online publicly, and you can see that there is very slightly. So for example, some plan would mention that a footpath should be abruptly created someplace, or there should be a parking policy that should come out, which is not really implemented at the end of the day. So these things are actually creating a lot of problems for mobility. And so basically we are not being able to assess what our demand is to actually supply for mobility, and which is why all of these problems are actually existent in the mobility network, the whole thing which we're talking about.
Snigdha, did you face any challenge while
Yeah,
compiling
that
this
has
data?
been the problem since we started working on this. There is no comprehensive or updated data available to assess the mobility pattern of a city, or even to gauge the congestion level in a city. I mean, just as Shubham said, for a city like Kolkata, we had to depend on a quarter century old data. So how does, I mean, that obviously doesn't give you a clear picture of the ground reality.
Absolutely.
All right. Shubham, since
Yeah.
you are a researcher with CSE, how do you think we take this forward? I mean, it's a grim picture from whatever we are hearing and talking about. It's a grim picture. So,
Yeah.
as a researcher, what is the way forward of this mobility crisis in itself?
Yeah. So first we should be now. I mean, I will try to go systematically how we have already carried out the discussion. So I will go point by point. So the first challenge that we should be addressing is the dependence on the public transportation, and to not dependence on private transportation. So what we need, basically, it has the approach of the carrot and the stick. So basically, we want to disincentivize people from using private transport, and then we also have to promote public transportation along the way. So by the carrot, I mean that we have to improve the services of the public transportation systems which exist. We have to make sure that the service level benchmarks of these transportation systems are being met. The last mile connectivity is reliable enough so that people actually think about taking these services. It's not a challenge to access the stations in the first place. Then we should also work on the availability of the infrastructure for the non-motorized transportation networks. They should not be abrupt. They should be a network so that the people actually think of them as viable options for their own primary trips, rather than just thinking of them as recreational, recreational mode, basically walking and cycling. The second, I would say, and while we have talked about the carrot, now the stick. So basically, we want to also disincentivize the private transport users. So basically, what we want is we have to implement vehicle restraint measures, what we call as so things like parking management policies, things like low emission zones, congestion zones. So basically, which are actually based in polluter pay principle. So basically increasing the cost of commute for the private transportation to make it less viable than public transport systems, because currently the problem is that the public transport system, while the fares are low, the overall journey is actually much less convenient and also costs more when you count the opportunity cost of time, right? Because of the larger travel and the multiple interchanges which are involved there. So so basically the vehicle restraint measures that will help with disincentivizing the private transport use in the cities. Then one very important thing, and Snigdha also touched upon it, is that we should be discouraging more infrastructure for cars. So roads, highways, all of these car-centric design should be discouraged, because more supply for these particular kinds of modes will actually result in more demand. It's not going to solve the congestion. So road widening in a place that's a bottleneck will not really solve congestion. It will just have more cars on the road. So we should be basically thinking of reclaiming the land from these particular modes, private transportation. We should therefore be looking at city designs which are based in compact cities, and then mixed land use. So basically, people are traveling less, and people are traveling less far as well. So the trip lengths are decreasing, and the rates are also decreasing. So that's why people will not really have to rely on using the private modes of transportation, which is more convenient. So these kind of positive things will happen, and then also we have to, like I said previously as well, and the problem we faced as well, that data should be available widely and it should be collected very regularly, so that policymakers and the decision-making team as well as the researchers have access to such data, so that they can be, there should be mechanisms made where people can share data. The different organizations, the different institutions which are involved in mobility, there are a lot of them. I understand that, but there should be a way to communicate amongst each other, so there should be indicators which can be understood by all of them, and the common aim should be achieved
In a
uh,
holistic.
yes,
holistic.
absolutely, yeah. So these are, I think, should be the obvious solutions.
Very detailed and well explained. Snigdha, before we close, and I think we are sort of running short of time,
Okay.
can you give us some final words, last word before we close about the issue?
Okay. So, Sukanya, what enrages me is that getting stuck in traffic is getting normalized. Congestion is getting normalized. Congestion takes your time away from your family. It takes your time away from your work. So it is the reason it doesn't allow you to engage in any other activity other than any other activity like leisure or social. So yet we are kind of forced to plan our day or even our life around congestion. So what is another point that is also infuriating is that the bulk of the people in Indian cities, they walk or cycle to work or take a bus. In Delhi, it is quite unbelievable, the numbers. But in Delhi, 42% of people still cycle or walk to work. The figures are even higher in Mumbai and Kolkata. Yet, most of our city roads are designed only for the motorists. Why? So I sincerely hope that the information and the concerns that we have gathered and highlighted in our How India Moves stories from across the country will nudge our urban planners and the authorities in some way to fix this never ending problem. What we need to remember is that cities are the growth engines of India, but only livable cities can help the country emerge as an economic superpower.
Right, I think on that note, and
Thank you.
Thank you.
really looking forward to read the edition now that it's out. You can check it out, and the analysis is already up on Down to Earth's website. You can
Yes.
check that out. All right. Until then, bye bye. Take care.